Hi, I'm Nancy McIntyre. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Biological Sciences at Texas Tech, and I'm curator of birds at the Museum of Texas Tech, and I'm going to be talking to you all about birds at Playas. I'm going to start off by talking about why birds are important, in other words, why should we care, about why they're here, meaning here at Playas, what kinds of birds we have here, what threats are faced by Playas and thus their birds, what you can do to help Playa birds, and how you can learn more. So first off, why should we care? Well, there are many reasons why birds are important. First off, birds provide a number of critical ecosystem services. For example, pollination. Many plants are pollinated exclusively by birds. Birds also perform important seed dispersal roles as they swallow fruit and the seed inside of them, and then they fly away and they disperse that seed with a convenient packet of fertilizer elsewhere. Birds are decomposers, so like for example these vultures around this carcass here, cleaning up what would otherwise be a very hazardous mess. And then birds are very important in pest control. This picture here shows an American kestrel, which is a type of falcon, and it's eating a grasshopper here, which is, of course, grasshoppers are agricultural pests. And so birds provide very important ecosystem services. But birds have other values as well. At least 46 million Americans enjoy watching birds, and they spend on average over $1,500 a year on gear like binoculars, for example, or bird feeders and bird seed, on trips to see birds, and on books like field guides. Bird watching is thus a very important economic force in many areas, and many areas have birding festivals that attract thousands of visitors that come and spend money on things like hotels and food and gasoline and so forth. That generates at least 860,000 jobs and generates over $107 billion in revenue in the U.S. each year. That's a very significant source of revenue for many towns. This is a faster growing economic driver than hunting or fishing or other outdoor pursuits. But birds also have other values that cannot be monetized. They're sources of beauty, they're sources of inspiration, and so forth. And so birds have value as providing ecosystem services, as economic forces, and then values that cannot be monetized. So why are birds here? Birds are here because of Playas. So take a look at this map of North America, and this blue outline is a rough outline of where Playas occur here in the central and southern part of the Great Plains of North America. These Playas provide critical habitat during breeding times, for overwintering, and as migratory stopover sites as birds travel thousands of miles between breeding sites and overwintering sites that may be farther north or farther south. These migratory stopover sites are kind of like rest stops or restaurants or hotels or gas stations where they can refuel and rest on these journeys that they make. But because Playas are typically fairly far south in latitude, they're generally ice-free, and so they're very important during the winter time when wetlands up in Canada, for example, would otherwise be iced over. Birds are on, the Playas are on the central migratory bird flyway, and so lots of birds travel along this route here shown in green, one of 4 major flyways in North America. And so thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of birds are passing over the Playa region, and they'll stop and make use of Playas for at least some part of their life. So as I mentioned, Playas are generally ice-free and thus are very important in the wintertime. And so some birds we'll only find here in the wintertime at Playas. So for example, let's take a look at this map here. This is a map for the cackling goose, the bird shown here. And in these kinds of field guide maps, the different colors denote different parts of the year and different functions that those parts of the landscape play. And so this sort of reddish orangish color up here in the far north, that's their breeding habitat. This is where cackling geese breed in high Arctic. The blue areas are where they overwinter, and the yellow areas are where they migrate through. They just pass through. And so as you can see here, these cackling geese, they're going to be relying on Playas during the winter time. Lots of other waterfowl also rely on Playas. So for example, northern shovelers, named because they've got this big honking bill here. American widgeons, Northern pintails, named for that nice long pin tail. Sandhill cranes are only here in the wintertime. And then shorebirds like Wilson's snipe and ring-billed gulls and many, many other birds that we'll only see here at Playas in the wintertime. But other birds we'll only see during the summer, during their breeding season. So, for example, this map here is for the American avocet here, this beautiful bird here with this up-curved bill, you can see there. And so again, the reddish areas are where they breed, so you can see that they breed at Playas, and they overwinter farther south here. Other birds that we'll only see at Playas in the summertime include snowy plovers, Swainson's hawks, black-necked stilts, so named because they have these real long stilt-like legs, and white-faced ibis, among many others that we'll only see here in the breeding season, the summer. Because Playas are in that central migratory bird flyway, there are lots of birds that only visit Playas during autumn or during spring as they're making their migratory journeys. So, for example, Baird's sandpiper here, you can see it breeds up here in the high Arctic, and they overwinter all the way down here in southern South America. They only use Playas as they pass through on migration here. They use that central migratory bird flyway here. And these wetland birds, obviously, they need the wetlands, the Playas, where they can stop and refuel and rest. Lots of other shorebirds do the same thing. So, for example, pectoral sandpipers, Wilson's phalarope, the lesser yellowlegs, upland sandpipers, long-billed dowitchers, Franklin's gulls, and many, many others that we'll only see here briefly during spring and fall. And finally, some birds are here year-round. So, for example, killdeer here, very loud bird that says their name, kildee, kildee, kildee. They're here year-round. So purple is where species occur year-round. Red plus blue makes purple. And so killdeer also breed farther north, and some will overwinter farther south, but we have them here year-round. And other birds that we'll see at Playas year-round include red-winged blackbirds, obviously named, western meadowlarks, great blue herons, mallards, and American kestrels, the smallest falcon in North America, among many others that we have at Playas all year through. So these birds in the Playas have seen lots of changes over the past 150 to 200 years. So again, the blue outlined area, that's roughly where the Playas occur. And prior to 1850, this area was mostly grasslands, denoted in this light green, shrublands, this kind of grayish green, and forests, this sort of more green-green. After European settlement, this became a nationally important agricultural area, and so these different colors denote different crops. Red is cotton, orange is corn, brown is wheat, and green is sorghum, among many others. And you can see urban areas in gray, like Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Denver, and so forth. And so the Playa area has experienced massive landscape changes. Obviously, that's affected Playas and their birds. Because Playas are ephemeral wetlands that are filled from precipitation and runoff, they are obviously influenced by the land use, land cover that is around them that can impede flow into them and can contaminate that flow. And they're also sensitive to weather and climate patterns that affect precipitation, but also temperature, which affects evaporation. So for example, up here, this map up here, the two figures on the left indicate two different potential future scenarios regarding precipitation, where brown is drier and blue is wetter in the future. And for the most part, the Playa area is going to be drier. And certainly down here, this central graph down here, we're already familiar with extensive droughts in this region, where Playas can be dry for years at a time. And we're also looking at a hotter future. Regardless of which model you follow, we're going to be hotter. And so that'll speed up evaporation. So the Playas won't hold as water for as long when they do receive that water. And Playas, most of them are on private land. And so multiple landowners, you have to work with multiple landowners in order to try to conserve these Playas that birds don't know anything about landowners. So birds see this as a unit. And yet conservation-wise, we have to work with individuals. And that's difficult because there's little legal protection for playas, and what there is typically incentivized. And so these landscape changes, plus weather and climate changes, are drastically affecting playas and thus, as you might expect, their birds. So what this all means is that climate variability means that you'll have variability in whether playas are wet and how many are wet at any given time just due to the weather. And so that means that habitat availability for birds fluctuates with the weather, sometimes drastically. And when you add land use land cover change on top of that, that can drain playas or contaminate them and so forth. The result is that most playas have lost the ability to hold water. So how does this affect birds? Well, obviously that means birds are experiencing habitat loss. So they lose habitat due to sedimentation, due to land use land cover change. That water is contaminated with sediments that never settle out. So that's why you see playas like this that look like chocolate milk. There's loss of playas due to disruption of their clay basin through like plowing or pitting or the building of roads like here. And that disrupts the ability of the playa to hold water. And then obviously there's loss of playas due to drought and climate change. There's water quality degradation due to polluted or sedimented runoff. And then there are other things that playa birds face as well, like for example, mortality due to turbine collisions or poaching and so forth. But those are relatively minor in comparison to habitat loss. So what can you do to help playa birds? Well, first off, you can connect with conservation organizations, just like the Ogallala Commons, as you are participating in this program. But there are other things that you can do as well. For example, you can purchase a duck stamp, even if you're not a hunter. You can get involved with your Audubon chapters. The Lubbock chapter is called the Llano Estacado Audubon Society, but there are chapters in other areas as well, like Amarillo and so forth. And Audubon, Texas has a statewide chapter. There's the American Bird Conservancy. And if you're a landowner, you can get in touch with the USDA, with the CRP Wetlands Restoration Initiative, with the Texas Playa Conservation Initiative, and you can get in touch with the Playa Lakes Joint Venture about ways that you can best use your land and also conserve playas and their birds. You can also help collect data on birds because we need to know which species are declining, which ones are increasing, which ones are holding steady, where might they be declining, when might they be declining. All of those questions can only be answered with data. And so you can get involved with things like the Christmas count that Audubon has every year, and through the North American Breeding Bird Survey that Fish and Wildlife conducts in the summer, and then citizen science through eBird or iNaturalist or many other opportunities that are out there for you to get involved watching birds and collecting data. So hopefully I've informed you and inspired you to learn more about playas and their birds and how you can help them. And so here are some books that I recommend. Field guides, like these 3 books on the top, are wonderful to have. And then there are other books down here about migration, about climate change, and about the ecosystem services that birds provide. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about playas and their birds.